I'm live in Dubai, but I almost wasn't. 45 minutes ago, I was sound asleep sitting upright in a chair. Luckily, I was already dressed for the show because it's been a difficult journey for me and even more difficult for Gayatri, who isn't even here yet from Moscow for reasons too convoluted to go into in a 20-minute monologue. But I hope that she'll be here for her slot. Not only that, because I didn't have our portable studio. So my good friend Naheem Sharif, WM, 1F in Sharif, follow him on Instagram, Naheem Sharif from Longsight in Manchester, a Manchester United supporter at utterly ridiculous notice, got me this studio. And my good friend Clark facilitated all of it and is even providing my tea in the absence of my good wife. Many, many thanks to I love this place. It's very hot, of course, but I do love the United Arab Emirates. I used to be big around these parts. This watch was given to me by the late and great ruler of the United Arab Emirates, Sheikh Zayed. I used to spend a lot of hours talking about politics with him. In fact, he gave me so many watches, I had to ask him to stop because every time he did, I had to register it in the House of Commons Parliamentary Register of Interests, and people imagined I was walking around with an array of expensive watches all the way up my arm. But I miss him dearly, and every time I'm in Abu Dhabi, I visit his grave at the exquisite Sheikh Zayed Mosque. So I love these parts, although these parts have no responsibility whatsoever for anything I am now about to say. I have never seen a performance like Donald Trump's at the United Nations General Assembly yesterday. I mean, literally never seen it. Not in comedic form, not in dramatic form, and definitely not in United Nations diplomatic form. It ranged far and wide, I think we could say. It was a stream of consciousness that Shakespeare could not have written in the mouth of Falstaff. It was every foolish folly that he could ever imagine himself saying, trotted out to an assembly, well, the most powerful assembly on earth, at least on paper, though not, of course, in practice. He even managed to insult the King of England by saying that the King, and indeed all of us in Britain, are going to Sharia law. What does that actually mean? We're going to Sharia law. What, the House of Commons is going to introduce Sharia law in Britain? How idiotic a statement is that? And yet the President of the United States made it to the United Nations General Assembly. He also complained, mind you, when the escalator stopped dead just as him and Melania were getting on it. He had a point in the criticism of the estate management of the headquarters of the United Nations, but he told us that he had bid $500 million to make a marvelous, wonderful interior for the United Nations. It would have been a kind of Trump Tower United Nations. But they had chosen in their wisdom to go for a bid at $2.5 billion. And look at it, he said. The escalator doesn't work. My teleprompter has stopped working. And presumably, not having a teleprompter, no, it has never stopped me, has the responsibility for the stream of consciousness which followed. It ranged far and wide, much of it too ridiculous to seek to replicate. But the most important departure from the Donald Trump of the day before, and who knows, the Donald Trump of tomorrow, was that it's no longer Biden's war in the Ukraine. It's no longer a war that he would have stopped, solved, like the 9 other wars he's already stopped, solved. It's no longer a war he intends to stop in 24 hours. Oh no, this war with Russia is going to go on and on. Of course, he's no longer giving money for it. He doesn't like America's money going to European countries. He doesn't like America's money going even to Zelensky. But he was very clear that he will continue to supply weapons with which they can do as they wish. Very key point, that. And they're already doing it. Moscow airport, just the other day, almost saw an aviation disaster as an airplane, funnily enough, from the Emirates Air, was forced to skim the tops of skyscrapers, presumably with hundreds of passengers therein, because Ukraine was firing drones at residential areas in Moscow at the time. He said, Trump, is going to continue delivering as many weapons as the European taxpayer is prepared to pay for. And that's where you come in, dear viewer. How many of you are prepared to keep on buying American weapons for the profit of the US arms companies to give to little Zelensky? But he was even more radically a new man when he said that Zelensky was one of the bravest men in the world, and that he had the capability, as long as NATO kept giving him American weapons, not only to recover all of Ukraine, all of it, including Crimea, but even further, which was enigmatic to say the least, unless he meant a reverse ferret, where Ukraine took even more Hungarian land, or took even more Romanian land, or took even more Polish land. He must have meant that Zelensky's army could march on Moscow. Now, many a tyrant has marched on Moscow, but none of them have survived to tell the tale. But it was basically a declaration of World War III. And that's important. Now, the fact that it contradicted all of his previous statements, including in the Oval Office itself, when he berated Zelensky, practically called him a thief, said that he had no cards, said that he was a dictator whose mandate had run out. Well, now Zelensky is effectively a Ben-Hur kind of figure who is going to go into battle with Donald Trump's full blessing. What that means for the relationship that we were told existed between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, one can only guess at. He called Russia, in this stream of consciousness, a paper tiger. Though Russia answered rather well today and said, we're not a tiger at all, we're a bear, and you don't get paper bears. He said that the Russian economy was crashing, but as you know, I've just left it and it's booming. And all international figures prove that it's booming. Its growth rate for the year far exceeded the growth rate of the United Kingdom and exceeded the growth rate of the United States of America. He said there were queues at the petrol stations. But I'm here to tell you that is a complete lie. I've been all over Moscow and Nizhny Novgorod, and not a single queue at a single petrol station was there. Why would there be? Russia has oil, petrol, gas, coal, gold, silver, minerals, everything that you can imagine coming out of their ears. The ruble is the best performing currency in the world right at this moment. But Donald Trump, the man who told us the British were going to Sharia law, says that the Russian economy is crashing and says that, well, Zelensky might well be in a position to take Moscow itself. It's bizarre beyond words, but words mean something, especially when they're uttered from the podium of the United Nations in New York. Even if there's no teleprompter involved, somebody is whispering ridiculous foolishness in the ear of the American president, because he didn't come up with that himself. He didn't allege there were queues at the petrol stations because he read it in the New York Times. He didn't read it anywhere. Somebody told him it. He didn't decide that Zelensky was no longer a dictator with no cards, but was in fact a man who could go all the way. He didn't read that in the New York Times. Somebody told him that. He's listening to some very dangerous voices indeed. Now, life is definitely stranger than fiction. I have just learned in the last 5 minutes before coming on the air that Nicolas Cage in 1998 starred in a Hollywood movie as a populist, rabble-rousing politician called Charlie Kirkland. And he was assassinated by a bullet to the neck by somebody called Tyler. Tyler Robinson, the man who assassinated Charlie Kirk to the neck. In parenthesis, I also just learned in the last 5 minutes from my good friend Clark, a Scotsman like myself, that in the 1890s, somebody called Ingersoll Lockwood published a series of novels called The Baron Trump Adventures. And the said Baron Trump is brought to Earth in a time machine in Times Square by a rocket man called Elon. I am not making any of this up. So Charlie Kirkland, played by Nicolas Cage, was shot in the neck by a guy called Tyler. Well, you, like me, may be beginning to think that the Charlie Kirk affair is itself a Hollywood movie because it has more moving parts, more patsies, more decoys, more obvious lunatic assertions by the state. I mean, Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby was nothing compared to the foolishness of what you've been told to believe by the state in the United States of America about the murder of Charlie Kirk. I told you I was one of the first in the world to say this. That terrible wound from which you saw Charlie Kirk's life's blood leaving his body was not the entry wound, but was an exit wound. And that is now proven beyond peradventure. Now that's important because if that was the exit wound and the entry wound came from the other side, that means Tyler ain't the shooter. And it means that gun isn't the murder weapon. And you have to ask yourself, if they're lying about the shooter, if they're lying about the murder weapon, they're lying about the whole thing. It's obvious. They're trying to tell you a furry. My God, I never thought I'd live long enough to know what a furry was. And I now know more about furries than I ever wanted to know. A furry whose boyfriend, girlfriend is a trans and who was found wandering on a roof but didn't have a weapon that was found in the woods. He's the patsy, all right. He may even believe that he was involved in it. He may have been told it was a Nicolas Cage movie. He may have been told anything, but he wasn't the shooter. And that weapon with the scope on wrong, such that it would have blown his eye out if he'd fired the shot from a Mauser, that wasn't the murder weapon. The murder weapon came from far more up close and personal. And personal may be a vital qualifier in the statement I have just made. Because it seems to me that who killed Charlie Kirk knew Charlie Kirk and maybe knew him very well. I've only got time, I think, to turn briefly to the events around Palestine, though there's much else I would like to say. You heard me on Wednesday about the recognition of the Palestinian state. Of course, I'm happy that countries that used to deny there was anything called Palestine now recognize there's a Palestine state. I'm happy that my formerly good friends in the British consulate in Jerusalem are now employees of the British embassy in Jerusalem. though that has not yet been formally gazetted. I'm happy that the address of the British consulate in Jerusalem is now listed as Palestine. I'm happy about that. I've got to be happy if I see Netanyahu unhappy. I've got to be happy if I see all these shills for Israel scurrying around, including Netanyahu's son who lives in Florida. No Gaza Strip military service for him. He's living in a hotel suite in Florida. He announced, well, I now recognize the state of French Caledonia, of Corsica, and so on. Another stream of consciousness like Donald Trump's. I'm happy when I see these people unhappy. But I have to repeat the point that I made to you on Sunday in the last show. Which Palestine is it that they are recognizing? The West Bank is already flooded with 800,000 illegal settlers. Jerusalem is having its Arab population systematically destroyed. And not just Muslim population, by the way. Even the Greek Orthodox Church is having its land stolen by settlers in the eastern half of the city. Jerusalem is being ethnically cleansed. A great replacement, maybe some on the American right will recognize that term, is taking place in the West Bank. And Netanyahu has said he's put 800,000 illegal settlers in to the West Bank, and he's going to double it. That means 1,600,000 illegal settlers. And don't imagine they're in log cabins. Don't imagine they're in rolled wagons. They're in cities with swimming pools and sprinklers. And of course, those sprinklers are fueled by water stolen from Palestinian farmers who don't even have enough water to keep their olive trees alive to be uprooted by the above-mentioned settlers. If there's 1,600,000 settlers in the West Bank, if Gaza is a pile of ash and rubble and bones, skeletons and blood, where is this Palestine that you are all queuing up now, rather belatedly, to recognize? What is this Palestine going to be when the British Prime Minister can tell them who they're allowed to elect to govern them, where the French president can declare they will not be allowed to have an army? What is this we're talking about here? Is this an independent state you're recognizing, or is this a kind of game that you are playing to divert attention from so many things that have fallen out of the news? Where's the Epstein files? Who's doing anything about the 50 ships of a flotilla headed for Gaza now being droned every night, even though it's filled with your own citizens? And the boats are flying your own flags. And you still haven't said one word about it. You think we're all going to calm down because of the letter heading of the British consulate in Jerusalem? All of this and more, much more, coming up over the next 2 hours. It is, after all, the mother of all talk shows. Stay tuned.